financial decisions or revolutionary decisions, when made in a collective, there's protection there. Welcome to New Dimes Radio. I am Berna, head of content and community at New Dimes, and today is going to be a very spicy conversation. As of this recording, it feels like a high-stakes time for so many things, and we have to make a lot of high-stakes decisions. The economy, wacko. Political environment, wacko. Astrology, probably wacko. We're all really feeling it today on the New Dimes team, and so is our guest. And if we are sinking into the understanding that money is power, the overall question that New Dimes is continuously trying to solve is how the hell do we wield that power and make those systems changing decisions with our wealth? These are decisions that are new. There's no blueprint. And so we need as much guidance as we can. And so our guest today, Jessie-Susannah Karnatz, is a shoo-in, is a no-brainer for helping us figure out how to make those decisions. Jessie-Susannah Karnatz brings capitalism critical, shame-free education to healers, hustlers, and creatives to catalyze change in their financial lives. She believes that healing finances will bring blessings to lives, lineages, and communities. Using her intuitive abilities, her experience as a tax preparer and bookkeeper, and the collected wisdom from her financial coaching practice, she helps people live more peacefully with their money. She's also a priestess of the egregore of money, facilitating a relationship between the collective consciousness of money and individual members of the collective for the purpose of healing. Jessie-Susannah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm a fangirl, so.
I'm psyched to have you on the show. Just to give folks a little background, I have known of Jessie-Susannah and her work as Money Witch on Instagram for years now. And it's one of those sort of like, I admire from afar with my hands, my chin in my fists and kicking up my feet every time I saw her posts and her work, especially about financial healing, really bringing in a completely new perspective to this world of like very rote, very technical, very capitalism, financial educators. And one of the reasons I was like, we got to get you on the show is because, as we've seen in the last 9 months, there's been this wave of awareness of genocides and wars that we're all very aware of. Folks started talking about tax protests and tax resistance, which we'll talk more about. And I just saw you really pop off in terms of creating materials, space, and just like beautiful ways to process and help your community process through those things. So I'm psyched that you're here.
Thank you. Fangirl for Fangirl is one of my favorite orientations.
Yes. Sorry, everyone, you have to witness that, or you're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. So at New Dimes Radio, we start all of our episodes with this question, and I'd love for you to kick things off for us. Jessie-Susannah, how are you and your wealth doing today?
It's a vulnerable day to answer that question. I'm going to say it's the perfect day to answer that question because I do believe in, divine order. So I'm like, okay, today's the day we're doing this recording. I would say highly anxious. Honestly, me and my wealth have had a highly anxious day.
My wealth honors and not encourages, but sees your wealth in its high anxiousness. We were just talking also with our producer, Kristen, about there seems to be, like you say, a divine order of anxious energy, and that is showing up in our wealth. I would say that my wealth is also having a similarly anxious day. I appreciate your vulnerability with that because like I said, it feels like a high stakes time globally and in our communities. And then personally, it's not like, our money's going to act right when we want it to. And so I would identify also with high anxiety wealth day. But I appreciate that so much. And if it's okay with you, since you are so wonderfully warm and open to getting a little vulny, as I heard on a podcast recently.
Getting vulny for sure.
Get a little financially vulny. I would love to start off with talking about your personal relationship to wealth. We know that it can be, it can be a very spicy topic to just jump into. So we've devised a game that I like to call Breaking Bread. It's a few levels of gentle financial relationship unpacking so we can heat up to the warm stuff and the bigger system stuff. Are you down to play Breaking Bread with me?
I think so.
Okay. Exciting. Okay. First level of Breaking Bread is the Preheat. So this is just straight up word association. I invite you to just say the first words that come to your mind. Cool?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I say money, you think?
Good.
Good. Wow. In the face of financial anxiety too, you better fucking...
but more money would be good.
Yeah.
That would make me less anxious.
Yes. We hold so many layers. We hold so many truths. Multitudes. When I say rich people, you think
complicated.
Hence multitudes. When I say financial trauma, you think
normal.
Finish the sentence. When I receive money, I feel
excited.
When I spend my money, I feel
like a baller.
Ooh, yeah. There's so much positivity. It's making me happy. When I donate my money or I give my money to the collective, I feel
inflow.
And then real quick check in with the body. When I am stressed about money, I feel it in my
forehead.
When I feel joyful about money, I feel it in my
chest and shoulders.
Love that. For those who are viewing the video, this is part of why I love me some Jessie-Susannah. She immediately was like, I'm in, eyes closed, grounded.
We're dropping into the body.
She's like, you said, yeah. I dropped in.
Yeah, you said drop into the body.
Yes. All right, beautiful. We're going to move on to the second level. I call it getting toasty. A little more digging on the more unspoken sides of your relationship with money and wealth. It's kind of lightning style, quick reactions. So share with us your latest quote unquote guilty / splurge / fuck it, I deserve this purchase.
Oh God. Well, my friend wanted me to drive her to Home Goods in Alameda because she doesn't drive and she wanted to buy something. But then I ended up spending more money than her because also it was Shabbat. And I was like, I definitely need purple water glasses and pink wine glasses. It's going to look so good on my table. But I don't have a lot of business with expendable income in this particular moment. So it wasn't a strategic decision.
Gotcha.
It was a passion decision.
Of course. I feel that at a Home Goods, I'm making more passion decisions than a strategic decision. Understood. This is related. One purchase that seemed extravagant at the time, but now you're like, that was actually worth every penny.
My Chihuahua. She was adopted, but it was still so expensive. Anyway. Yeah.
And dogs continue to be expensive. Like,
I know. I was like, oh, this is a lot of money. This is a wise choice, but I love having her. Yeah.
Worth every penny. One financial mistake that you feel you're still paying for.
The financial mistake I feel like I'm still paying for is not saving for retirement earlier.
What is one belief you inherited about money that you wish you did not?
That it should be hoarded within family lineage.
Oh, spoiler alert, we're going to talk about that. And if you'd like to share, currently, what is your biggest financial fear?
That my business is only feeding itself and not me, and I should shut it down.
I feel that you are the FBI agent in my phone. But also, like the Bluetooth chip in my speakers, our producer, Kristen, is making she went on camera just to make a wild face because, oh my God, I'm sweating the divine timing of it all.
Okay, well, maybe we need to get on a side conversation, support group.
Jessie-Susannah, hold my virtual hands, please. All right. Wow. Even though that is a dark, shadowy place to talk about, I also feel incredibly seen in this moment and so energized and sweaty. Last level. It's a third level. I call it the Buttery Finish because we appreciate you going so deep with us.
Delicious.
You like? Exactly. We got to end it on a positive note. You got vulnerable. You shared with us. And so we want to finish off on like a hopeful, expansive note. So, and these responses can be as long or as short as you like. One thing that you did not receive or get to buy as a kid, but you can now buy or you have bought.
Well, I don't have it yet, but it's going to be a Corvette because I wanted a Barbie Corvette, but I'm going to get a real one.
Oh my God. Like for my human adult body.
Uh-huh.
Oh my God,
yes.
I love it. One personal financial habit that you are actively working on right now.
Shopping.
Word.
home goods. Please revisit the home goods question from earlier.
And our last question, if you had $10,000 to invest in a community member or an initiative right now, aside from obviously feeding ourselves, what would you fund?
If I had a fantasy ballot initiative, it would be to decommodify housing. I don't think it's like a flat out, like make it illegal to own housing for commercial purposes, but something a lot closer to that.
Love that. Thank you so much, Jessie-Susannah, for playing the Breaking Bread game. Do you feel warmed up? Do you feel zhuzhed?
I do.
I appreciate you getting into that game and helping to make connections. I think from your answers, what stands out to me is even though we started off talking about like the state of our wealth being high anxiety, and we had this like kind of conversation with our eyes about how difficult it is to be a creator and a business owner right now, and oh my God, should I shut it all down? There was still a lot of fun and like joy in many of your answers as well. I think it's amazing that you hold both of those things kind of readily at the surface.
I think like money, when you were saying, oh, there's a lot of positivity, I'm like, money has to be your friend. Like it's like money, you have to be in positive relationship with money, because otherwise I feel like it's a bit of an abusive relationship. I mean, I really hold money as like an entity and like, not a deity, but I call it like an egregore. An egregore is sort of like a collective thought form that is almost has a spirit of itself because of how much energy we're all infusing in it. So I'm like, you can't be like, oh, I hate you, money's bad, but then when I want something from you, you should come and give it to me. Like, that's not a good relationship.
That's really wild because it actually makes me think of kind of traditional religious function of how a lot of people see like the quote unquote gods of just like, oh, I might get mad at this like greater spiritual power when it's not going my way, but then I come begging when I do need it to go my way.
Yeah, it's a little twisted.
Interesting. So to think of, I'm just like, I'm trying this hat on of seeing money as what you said, an egregore, as sort of a spiritual being that you have a relationship with, which is, I'm so glad we're talking about that because you bring such a unique perspective to money just by itself. But our topic also, and one of the reasons we wanted to chat with you specifically, is then figuring out your relationship to money and then using that relationship and your understanding to make what we keep calling financial revolutionary decisions, especially in these unprecedented times, which seems to just like unprecedented us every 10 seconds. Calling back to one of the reasons I was like, Jessie-Susannah is that girl, I noticed you making a ton of content and holding space and conversation around things like tax protest and tax resistance. For myself, I'm a person who is relatively new to the idea of financial activism, right? Like I know that money is a weapon, money can be a weapon, money can be a tool. I am seeing so much happening around me and I'm learning new concepts like tax protest and things like that. But overall, what I want to explore with you is like, how do I then make those decisions for myself and figure out whether it's right for me or not? Just using tax resistance and tax protest as sort of the vehicle, I would love to hear from you what your journey with that has been and how that's related to your relationship with money. How did you find out about it? Kind of walk us through your mindset in learning about it, regurgitating that, and walking your audience through it and making decisions.
The reason I started creating content about it is because I was seeing it come up. I hate inefficiency in general, but also specifically around political organizing. I'm like, I don't think we have energy to waste. Resistance energy is highly sacred. It's also very exhausting. So I want for people to make strategic decisions, to understand the decisions that they're making, and then to be able to implement them, like have the tools to implement them. So I saw it coming up and I felt like people kept being like, we should do this. And I'm like, I hate to just hear a bunch of people be like, we should do this. I'm like, okay, well then do it or don't do it, right? Like explore it, the options, see what it is. And it's something that's been on my radar forever. I don't know why. I guess just kind of coming up in activist circles. It's like, I know that's a thing people do is not pay taxes, but it's kind of funny because I had been holding it as this thing, like as a very fringe thing to do. that creates a lot of complication in your life and that I sort of recommended not doing. Or I'm like, either do it or don't do it. I think a lot of people who are angry at the government do a thing with taxes where there can be like a lot of foot dragging and hand wringing and procrastination and just kind of like turmoil, but then you're doing them in the end. So I'm like, okay, so you just gave Empire like 40% more effort of human energy than you needed to, and you didn't even like do the resistance activity. So I was kind of like, this is a choice that you could make. It's pretty fringe. Probably you're not going to do that. So just do your taxes on time.
Gotcha.
And don't, hand wring so much.
If we pause for a second, for those who are a little bit new to the concept, can you give us a little bit of a overview of what tax resistance / tax protest is? What is one of the others there?
I would say tax protest would just be like, using your taxes as a form, like taxes as a site of resistance or as a site of protest, which maybe are slightly different things. Like resistance, I think actively of like pushing against a current, like you're in the river and it's like going against you and you're kind of like, I'm going to walk upstream. And protest being like, I'm making kind of like I'm registering a complaint in some sort of like visual written way. So I don't think they're like two distinct things. They're just kind of like intertwining ideas. There's a few different ways that people can do it, but the most basic would just be to refuse to pay taxes to the government of the empire, which is something that has happened throughout the time that governments have existed. People have refused to pay taxes as an act of protest and resistance. So it can range from anything from like 100% not paying your taxes and just saying like, I'm not paying these, to not paying a symbolic amount. Some people take like the percentage of the federal government or your taxes that goes to military and don't pay that percentage. There's a variety of different tactics that it can take. It has historically most been utilized, I think, in the like peace, like anti-war and peace movements. I think that's the place where war tax resistance has been the most strongly rooted.
Gotcha. And you mentioned that it's something that you've known about for a long time, you've seen in practice with folks, and kind of ultimately you landed on, I think before you've sort of called it, you're sort of tax resistant agnostic. And I'd love to hear how you came to that when you're sort of seeing it happen in the universe and seeing that there are consequences and there's some frustration, there's like feet dragging. How did you come to the place of, it's not necessarily for me?
I feel like just like a strike, it is something that would require a high level of organization, like a very broad coalition organizing in order to have impact. And I don't think that it has real financial impact, really, because if you get into the economics of like real like economics and the government, it's like, it's not real money. It's not like the government takes all the little checks that we're writing and deposits them and is like balancing their checkbook. I can only spend as much money as like the US citizens gave me. Like they're printing money. Shit is fake. It's all fake. It's all debt. We're moving money countries to countries. It's not even real, So I have some question about like I don't necessarily think what's going to happen is like the government's going to be like, oh, I can't afford to buy bombs for like fall 2025, so like I guess we won't send any anywhere. I think it's more like a popular uprising movement of just saying like it's symbolic of a complete lack of willingness to follow the rules. And I think that's like what would be significant about it. So I kind of feel like people at this point, almost like if you're choosing to do it, it's almost just like on a strictly like personal, like you need to feel right with like God or whatever, your ethos, and so you're like, I'm not paying this. Like, this is what I'm doing. But I think in order to be like highly effective, it would need like a broad organization. And just like the same way with general strikes and things like that, it's sort of like, a lot of people who have financial or job precarity are kind of like, I'm not gonna like quit my job or not go to work unless everyone's doing it, because it needs to like really have impact for it to be worth the sacrifice, because it is a sacrifice. And war tax resistance does involve sacrifice, including, you're amassing debt to the federal government. So it honestly depends, right? And it's like there's all kinds of people who like can't do it. It jeopardizes, like it definitely jeopardizes like an immigration case. It jeopardizes lots of things. You could potentially like lose personal property. There's very few examples of the government taking it to those points, but there's also very few examples of people actually engaging in the protest, right? So it's like, it's one of those things that like, if the government were to take it seriously, there could be more consequences. At the very like lowest consequence, I would say what you're doing is putting yourself in debt to the government. And I'm gonna go like a little YouTube conspiracy theory for one moment, which is to say, on the trajectory that things are going, do I consider it out of the question that we may end up in a paradigm of like bringing back like debtor's prison or something like that? No, I don't consider that out of the options of possibility. So I have a little fear around it, I think, like for people, and I like want for people to do it in the safety of like a mass of numbers, And at the same time, protest does often require sacrifice, and we're all kind of like weighing what are we willing to give up. But what I want for people to do is to weigh that in relationship to like the effectiveness of the strategy.
Gotcha. I think you highlight something super important, especially there towards the end of like financial decisions or revolutionary decisions. When made in a collective, there's protection there, right? There's something where, we might be all sort of measuring our risk tolerance in terms of these things. You highlighted, you could put yourself into debt. You put yourself in the way of the government coming in and intervening on your finances, kind of sticking yourself out. It's not an incredibly efficient way to make a statement. When made in the collective, there is protection and there is movement, but it seems like without that collective understanding, though, then the risk is much higher. And it's interesting because we had a conversation with Adrienne Maree Brown on this podcast, and the conversation went to her experience with tax resistance. And she actually ended up, for a long time, for years, her story was that she wrote letters basically to the government being like, you can suck it. I'm not paying these taxes for many, many years. Didn't see a lot of consequences until there were consequences and her bank accounts got emptied out. And so she's another example of someone who was trying to be thoughtful, trying to make a revolutionary decision, and that ended up jeopardizing her as an individual because it was not necessarily part of a collective movement. And so I feel like that's a little bit of what you're getting at, is inviting listeners to assess what their risk tolerance is, knowing all the dangers and where those dangers are leading to. Like you said, I'm very much, there's a YouTube conspiracist that lives in my head as well. So I'm like, speak on it. And also, is it efficient? Do we see it working? What is your tolerance for efficiency as well? Like, how quickly do you want this to turn around for you? So I think it's fascinating for you to lay this out for us, especially when so many of us are feeling like, I want to do something with my anger. I want to direct my rage. I want to stick it to the man in some way. But this might not be the most efficient way to do it for folks.
I do maybe think there's more effective ways. I think that being open to doing it or organizing around it, like as a broad political strategy, I think that those are worthwhile things to do. But it's like I've seen a lot of people in tax debt because I did tax work for self-employed people for 8 years, and the IRS doesn't consider political tax debt any different, any different than regular tax debt. Like it just goes through the regular system. So I've definitely seen like many people get money pulled from their bank account, have their bank accounts wiped out. Like the IRS, the state can definitely do those things. And with the effectiveness, I'm kind of like, okay, what happens if you're in multiple years of tax debt? Like you're amassing penalties, you're amassing interest. So it's like, if at the end of the day, if part of the point was to like give less money to Empire, you're actually going to give more money to Empire. But you did make a symbolic political stance, which I don't think is irrelevant or not important. But yeah, just on a practical level, it's not been something that I have been super attracted to. Also, and I know a lot of the content I was creating was kind of based on this, is I'm always a little suspicious because I do a lot of financial shadow work. So it's like I'm with people like really getting into like what's in the underneath of like, why are you acting how you're acting? And I'm like, a lot of y'all just don't want to do your taxes. Oh, like that's what I knew. That I was just like, everyone's like, yeah, war tax resistance. I'm gonna not do my taxes. And I'm like, no, babies, this is not how this works. This is not like a free pass to just like not do something you didn't want to do anyway. Like, it's like if we were like smoke weed for the revolution, like everyone would be like, yeah, like it's just like, I just felt like I had that kind of energy to it. And I was like, no, this is like a real thing that should be approached with real strategy and real consideration for personal and collective risk and approached with maturity. And I know a lot of you all are not approaching your finances on that level. Like, I know, with no judgment, but but I know. So I'm like, yeah, I don't, like, sure, but like, let's get some education. Let's get some choice making. Let's be like making this choice with our like a holistic choice.
Yes. I want to zoom in on a phrase that I've heard you say before, but maybe our listeners have never heard: financial shadow work. Because I feel like you are definitely pulling some wigs off right now and having people feel a little called out of like, oh, snap. Maybe I did just see XYZ revolutionary financial decision as like a woohoo, free pass, I'm out. What is financial shadow work, and how does that play into the way we make financially potentially revolutionary decisions?
Yeah, financial shadow work is like looking at the subconscious landscape of why you are like moving in your finances the way that you are, which is like your actions, but also your mentality and also, your attitudes towards other people, your judgments, like all of those things. Like, have you really thought or talked about this? And a lot of people have not really talked out a lot of their beliefs and behaviors around money. So making space to like really do that actively with like support and, paradigms. And that's like really what I do. That's, I do other things, but that's really like the crux of what I do, is help people figure out the underbelly. I used to joke that if I had a podcast, it'd be called What Your Problem Is, because it's like, I'm like, that's what I do, is like, people are like, I'm not saving because I'm irresponsible. And then I'm like, let's talk for 2 hours and then I'll tell you what your real problem is.
You're like, you may have adopted this script from somewhere else, but in maybe what is nestled under or part of financial shadow work, you're able to sort of pick out like, oh, this is where the real rub is. And maybe from there, when they're unpacking those things, they're able to make more sort of aligned decisions, I guess, in banking, but also in activism and in like collective power.
Absolutely, because the anxiety we have about money shows up in the way we deal with money in organizing and in activism and in community and in a revolutionary framework also. So it's like, if you're avoidant about money and anxious about money, just like you're bringing that to the group. Like, it's like clean up your side of the street. You know what I mean? So it's like, this comes up a lot periodically over the years. And I have like a little piece coming out in a book that's about, I call it like budgeting for reparations. And that's just one example, right? So it's like, the way that people don't budget or understand or stand in a place of like conscientiousness in their own personal finance shows up in the way that they engage with mutual aid. And I'm kind of holding like giving money, mutual aid, reparations, like charity, these are all sort of like facets of a thing where I'm just like, I'm moving resources like out of my life. I like the Hebrew term Sadaka, which is like moving money in alignment with divine order. So that like all those things are kind of like facets of that to me. That is what results in things like the whiplash effect of like people, especially white people, like giving tons of money to things and then being like, oh, I can't give any more money, and then it's like people having this impact of like having their organizations and like mutual aid projects like heavily funded and then having that like dry up really fast. And there's no, there's like emotional and spiritual and communal ramifications of behavior like that, but it's like really coming out of people's own messy behavior with like their own relationship with money. And at a baseline, budgeting is such a great tool for anything. Budgeting is the baseline tool for anything because everything, investment, mutual aid, reparations, saving, paying down debt, everything depends on how much surplus money you have. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if you don't actually have a grasp on how much surplus money you have, or you're not like engaging in a place of somewhat control around how much surplus money you have.
What can you do?
what can you do? You can ride vibes, which I love to do, and often results in like chaotic behavior that erodes trust in community and in organizing spaces.
Let's move then in that direction of sort of where you're bringing us, which is you kind of walked us through the consequences of what happens when you don't do your financial shadow work, when you're not unpacking the why behind your financial decisions. You might be sort of like grabbing at these options that aren't actually aligned with you. Speaking from your personal experience, what kind of financial revolutionary moves are you doing and that have actually felt aligned with you? And you highlighted a little bit about some of the moves already, from like budgeting to engaging in mutual aid, but maybe help us walk through ways that you've decided you can engage in certain levels, maybe engage in terms of, you know, financial revolutionary moves that you can make within the system, with outside of the systems, with each other. Just let us know, like, what are you doing instead, and how did you get to those decisions?
For me, I think most of the work that I am doing outside of like teaching other people how to do things is in the realm of like mutual aid and fundraising. That is just sort of like where I feel the most kind of called and the most impact. It feels personally effective to be able to like raise money collectively using my platform in order to give money to somebody or something. Mostly, almost exclusively people in a mutual aid way. I haven't like ever fundraised for like an organization or a, you know, ballot initiative or something like that, candidate. So yeah, the direct transfer of funds. And I think it's something that I engage in, both like trying to utilize like the network I have, but also in giving money in ways that feel like it hurts a little, you know, like just kind of like, okay, you know, like there's things I can choose to like not engage in for myself in order to like give money in a certain way when we're like looking, you know, for example, right now we've been in 300 days of trying to fundraise money to like move people out of an actual genocide zone. So it's sort of like, okay, like I could buy things at Home Goods, or I could like give people money to like literally maybe save their lives. Just trying to like stay in touch with that reality. And this is where like the budgeting and the shadow work and the boundaries and the like, all those things have to be really explored, because, you know, I'm also like not choosing a ascetic life either.
Yes. Let's lean into that. What parts of like financial decisions or setups have you then decided to partake in, quote unquote, the game or the system? Because you and I both know that when you come from, you know, marginalized communities and you're kind of exploring your shadow work, your financial shadow work, we can feel a lot of frustration in working within these systems with service providers who don't understand our values, with the sort of game that's set up makes you feel like you have to invest in a certain way to save for retirement, or you have to do a certain thing to get the right credit score. So are there parts of the system that you are partaking in? How are you doing it, if at all? And what's sort of the thought process behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part at this point in my life, I am engaging quite a bit. Like I'm a banked person. I have money invested in traditional stock market through like Roth, and through I have some money in Elvest. You know, I'm paying my taxes. I will listen to traditional financial advice, but I don't always follow it. I'm really good at compartmentalizing and kind of just like taking what I want from whatever information. So, you know, which does somewhat come out of like being not marginalized. And so I feel like that's a tool that I try to like lend, which is part of like the taxes thing, right? I'm like, I can read IRS documents like and say what they say. I can kind of like translate some of this, but financial authority is one of I have like a 6 portal, these 6 portals to financial healing, which is one of the paradigms I'm working with right now. And financial authority is really important to me, which means that like you and your values and your personal experience and your lineage and your wisdom is as important in your financial decision making as this, you know, like tradition. I actually don't even want to apply like traditional, but it's like, yeah, systemic, colonial, capitalists framework of money, the money game. I'm definitely like a diversity of tactics person. So it's like, I'm like, yes, do some in the system stuff, do some out of the system stuff, do some kind of like prepper conspiracy stuff. Like I'm like, yeah, maybe we have the Alvest account, like, and we have the gold bars, and we have some cash buried in a box in the yard, like, let's do it
This is
all.
what they meant by diversification, I feel.
That's what I mean by diversification, for sure. Yeah.
My ultimate goal, I think, with this conversation is I wanted to be able to sort of show and walk through for listeners like a menu or almost like a risk slider of options. One of the things that we're like psyched about working on at New Dimes is the idea of there being sort of a financial map of like, okay, if you want to make progressive change with your money, here's some things that you need to take care of. But at a certain point of the map, it's like bloop, it kind of all becomes not so much linear, but like you say, sort of XY axes and like different gradients and spectrums of where you can move. Again, this is why we're so excited to talk with you, Jessie-Susannah, because I think you really understand that there's so many layers, so many complications to the way we move with money, the systems around us, that it needs to be thought of as a gradient. And I really think you've helped folks in this episode figure out what their gradient might look like and like open up and be warm to the complications of it all so you can choose where you stand.
And I think the in and out of the system too, like that's maybe even like another axis because, there's little things like I would say like even like shoplifting from corporations, I would consider to be an act of financial resistance at this point, it's sort of like low effort, medium risk, depending on what your body looks like. There's also like making choices to do financial transactions like out of the systems, keeping things in cash as much as possible, keeping things untrackable, bartering, doing things like, in a mutual communal way that doesn't necessarily require like an exchange of cash, organizing collectives. Like I used to be involved in work around cooperatives, alternative economic structures in terms of even just like business and communities, alternatives to insurance, alternatives to savings, through communal saving projects or like funded projects. There's a wide spectrum and there's a challenge for people who feel like they're just getting a grasp on how to play the game to then be like, okay, how do I maybe hold like a sophistication of tactics and an acknowledgement that a lot of tactics that maybe are seen as lesser than because people aspire in a kind of like American dream framework to grow out of them actually are good tactics if they can be integrated into like being allowed to be within the system, playing within the system, and also integrating these kind of tactics that we're talking about that are like very normal in marginalized communities, right? Like sharing whatever, like doing things in cash, like doing things outside the system, like trading, all of these, collectivity strategies. Yeah, they're not things to grow out of, really. They're just sort of things to like how can we integrate? And it's like this comes up a lot in financial work. There's like young child is very like compliant, and then there's sort of like adolescent rejection of, and then it's like after we're kind of getting to a point of like, how do I synthesize like, where I came from, what is important to me, and also like the things that I've discovered on my own as being crucial to my like soul's path, or like things that I have worked hard to like gain my entryway into. Like, what's the synthesis of those things? What's the integration point? And how can I, like, if I'm finding myself stuck in a paradigm of like needing to play the game and feeling like I don't have any options to not play the game, where can I challenge myself a little bit to like spark my revolutionary spirit maybe a little bit into like remembering that like the game is just a game, it's not like a truth, it's a game, and it's an illusion. Like capitalism is a magic spell, and it has very, very powerful practitioners. Capitalism is not nature. There's not a system of nature that people weren't taught and like now they're getting the information about. Like it's more like secret cult kind of, now you're getting the like practitioner secrets. But so much of capitalism is held up by bravado, honestly, that I'm like a little like deflating of the importance of it, I think is very good for shifting like the energy around capitalism.
Oh my God, my brain is sparking in a million different directions because I think this is exactly the sort of like skull cracking I wanted you to bring to our audience of,
Awesome.
you know, because we can start off like kind of what you were saying. You could start off like inside of the sort of American dream. You're in one paradigm, and the way to get out of it is to bust it open and to crack it. And you're making me actually think of like a reflection of our own ancestry, our own like indigenous practices of moving money and caring for each other. It's almost like in the most simple sense, we have conflated so much of like capitalism's magical spell, and that's not to minimize the damaging, horrifying effects of it. But I love that you're sort of pushing us to go, well, it's not necessarily F capitalism and that's the only answer. There's actually many more expansive answers, big and small actions we can take that kind of remind us that like, I love the thought, just capitalism's like the game is just a game. And there are ways to work outside of the game, step outside of the paradigm and still care for each other and care for ourselves. You're also making me think of the fact that like both of us use the internet, we use social media to reach our audience and to do our work. Maybe not the sort of like overly linear way to think about financial revolutionary decisions would be like, well, just fuck my Instagram following then and delete the account. And I can't be part of these systems. You're like, well, how can we actually leverage the things that we have built kind of in that way? The teenager would be like, fuck it all. And the adult, the person maybe who has done the financial shadow work can go, well, how do I integrate that in a way that doesn't need to feel so like, oh, I must reject it because I must reject it all. And so I feel like I'm doing lots of sort of spiritual financial integration as we sit here. And I want to be mindful of all you've given us already and of your time. Jessie-Susannah, thank you so much for being with us today in conversation about how to make financial revolutionary decisions and how to sort of expand your mind when it comes to making those decisions consciously. I want to know if someone's listening to this episode and they're like, I must work with Jessie-Susannah. I must follow.
I must.
I must. What are you up to? How can people support you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, everything bridges off moneywitch.com. I do too many things, but the main two ways to work with me is to join my cult of financial self-love, which is called Money Coven. That is like a group of people who have space online and resources online, are in conversation online. And also we meet somewhere between like 3 to 6 times a month in a variety of different capacities. Once a month to like work on our budgeting together as a group practice for like spiritual purposes and all kind, there's a whole paradigm. And we travel through the 6 portals to financial healing that my like little paradigm in a cyclical calendar. We kind of have our own little calendar and culture. That is a way to do that in community. And I also do take one-on-one clients for a 3-month container. And that's through my coaching program, which is called Empress of Fortune, which is a sort of individual financial shadow work and goals journey. If you feel like you want to like, just be held a little more personally and get into the depths. You can find me on Instagram at money.witch. YouTube is probably like another great place. TikTok, I have it, but I don't touch it that much. But yeah, mostly Instagram at money.witch. If anyone wants to talk to the guy who has at moneywitch and get him to give it to me, that would be cool.
Excuse me.
Yeah, or YouTube. Those are great social media places. You can find my book at the library or the store. I make money magic products like oils and essences and those kinds of things. I have online courses. There's lots of like little auxiliary ways, but the main 2 ways is Money Coven or Empress of Fortune.
Beautiful. We're going to link to all of those things in the show notes. Jessie-Susannah, once again, thank you so much for joining us on New Dimes Radio. Really appreciate it. And we can't wait to have more financial revolutionary, financially healed conversations with you in the future.
Also, parting thoughts, fuck Elon Musk.
Fuck Elon Musk. We agree. You are the absolute best, Jessie-Susannah. Thank you so much.